look myself in the mirror and accept that if you weren't a racist, you condone what a racist did. So that's, to me, the same thing. It's the same thing. So
I agree with you completely.
Sounds to really make you rub and scrub. Swing badang badang bong biddly biddly bong. Bong biddly 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 bong. I said, pass the dutchie on the left hand side. Pass the dutchie on the left hand side. It a go bun.
Anthony, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invite.
I appreciate it.
You got a big show. You got a big following. So God bless you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Both of you, welcome to the show. I greatly appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, and good morning.
The floor is yours.
Whatever it is, it'll keep till the morning. Haven't we both got better things to do? Midnight blue.
I'm on your side, I still care. I may have died, but I've gone nowhere. Just think of me, I'll be there. Just think of me, I'll be there. There you go. Bit rusty.
Oh. You know what? I gotta tell you, usually I make my guests get a little emotional if I find something that touches them. You got me this time. So viewers, you're always telling me you got this one emotional. That got me emotional. I had to wipe my eyes.
No.
Since you told me you've seen some of the shows already, welcome, Johnny, of course. You know the running joke on my show is, because you're 6 hours ahead of me,
Oh, yeah.
I need the lottery numbers.
What do
But
you mean? These ones?
there you go. I love it.
I'm
There
one
you
step
go.
ahead of you, man.
Hey, folks, the man with the pinky ring and the New York thing, forget about it. Bad Brad Berkwitt, and you're watching another episode of the Bad Brad Berkwitt Show on the Ringside Report Web TV channel. Now, make sure you hit that button and subscribe. I greatly appreciate all of my subscribers from around the world. As well, follow me on Twitter at BadBradRSR. Again, that's at BadBradRSR. Well, today, folks, you saw the press release. You know my dear friend is back for her 4th appearance on the show, and we're going to be talking about her book, The Reckoning. Now, go back to my channel and find a review that I did a couple of weeks ago that seemed to resonate with a lot of people around the world, and that was the purpose of it. Everybody knows I adore. I know everybody has sent me DMs and texts and everything else about how you adore. Well, without further ado, my dear friend, the one, the only Mary L. Trump. Already, before we even start talking, we got a special guest. I love it. Say hello, Lyndon.
Hi.
He's looking around. I love it.
Oh,
I love it. Look at it.
99% of the day, he ignores me entirely. I get
love
on Zoom
I love
and
it.
suddenly,
Well, Mary, first of all, welcome back to the show. Thank you for coming on.
thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Usually it's Sebastian that comes into the shot.
Yeah, I had to put him on lockdown because he's starting to get jealous when I do Zooms and it doesn't end well for my fingers.
Well, the clip with the Midas touch,
Oh, it's
that was
hysterical.
hilarious. I told Ben I was on the floor watching that. All right. Like I told the viewers, this particular show, you watch other shows with Mary where I've done 360s, you know all of those, who her favorite band is, The Who, and we know all that good stuff. So today we're going to talk about her book, The Reckoning. We're going to go in depth on it. I'm going to read some excerpts at different points, some talking points, some questions, throw it all in, and let's rock and roll. You ready? Oh, the tail. I love it. I love it. It's a microphone. It's a boom mic in the back of Lyndon.
That's right. That's
Let's
what
look
that
at those
is.
green eyes. Beautiful cat. How old is Lyndon? How old?
Lyndon is 7. Yep, he's 7. He used to have a brother.
I remember you told me.
So we're still, well, I think Lyndon's dealing with it just fine.
Right.
I'm still getting it over it. It was 2
I-
years ago.
I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start at the beginning. I'm gonna talk about the introduction. I'm gonna read a part of it, then I'll ask you a question off of that, Mary. So in the introduction for your book, The Reckoning, you had wrote that for several months after you reluctantly went to your Aunt Mary Ann's and Elizabeth's birthday party in April 2017 at the White House, you were in the worst psychological shape in your life, you said. Several months later, you checked into a treatment center in Tucson that specializes in PTSD and other things. You would be there for weeks excavating decade-old wounds and trying to figure out why your Uncle Donald's elevation to the White House had so undone you. I will say this part before I ask you the question. Many people who read your book and adore you reached out to me who are not fans of your uncle. And they usually start out with, if you do a show or something, it usually starts out with, I cannot stand what your uncle caused. So I always reiterate to you that you got a lot of people all over the world that absolutely adore you, including me. So what I want to ask you is off of that, I don't want you to say anything you don't feel comfortable with, but what can you share about that time? And once you completed the treatment, did you find the answers you were looking for?
Yeah, it was a really rough time. But I was fortunate enough to be able to make the choice voluntarily to go. And I was also fortunate enough to be able to afford it because it's incredibly expensive and it's well out of the reach of most people, which is a huge problem. And it just speaks to the fact that this country, you know, we're talking about infrastructure a lot. Well, that should also be, you know, in supporting people trying to achieve mental health, especially after the last year and a half, which has taken such a toll. But, you know, I knew that something had to give, and kind of staying home, obsessing about the news, feeling helpless, wasn't the answer. So it helped tremendously. I went in kind of in a rage. I don't think I spoke to another human being for the first 5 days I was there because I was so angry. But in a weird way, because places like that are anonymous, because a lot of people there are there for substance abuse issues or whatever. And I didn't have to tell anybody who I was related to. So the anonymity was really helpful. But more than that, it was sort of the being in an institution like that and having it be so contained and having a lot of other people who were in the same boat, and there was no judgment because, again, everybody was in the same boat, so nobody was throwing stones. I got a lot out of it. I did learn a lot. And one of the most important things I learned, which I think has enabled me to speak about the last couple of years in a way some other people might not be able to, is that, you know, you don't get over anything until you face the truth of the trauma. And the truth of the trauma doesn't mean being able to explain to people what the trauma was. I mean, that's very easy because when you have PTSD, the reason you have it is because you've split the fact of the trauma, you've split the emotion off from that. So it never gets processed. So facing the truth of trauma means allowing yourself or forcing yourself to feel those feelings that belong to the experience. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to ask anybody to do because it's like torture. So, you know, I kind of feel like the country's in that boat. And, you know, obviously I was better than I was before when I got home, but in the world, like in the country, things kept getting worse. So, and the other problem is 3 days before I came home, I broke my foot.
Oh, no.
So it was this like horrible irony. One of the reasons I went away was because I was like stuck on my couch, obsessively watching MSNBC and, you know, what do they call it? Doom scrolling on Twitter.
Mhm.
And then I go to treatment and I come home and I'm stuck on my couch again with my foot
Broken
in the
foot.
air. Because, so the good thing about that, although I'd still like, that was actually really traumatizing too. But if that hadn't happened, I don't believe I ever would have worked with the New York Times reporters. And you and
Okay.
I would not be having this
Conversation. Okay. All right. Chapter 1, atrocities. 2.5 days it took me to read this book. I cried and I raged at different parts. I said that in the book review, and I meant that. Even preparing for the show, reliving it, oof. So I want to talk about Luther Holbert and his wife, because that just tore me apart. So Luther Holbert, who was accused of killing a wealthy plantation owner named James Eastland. Now, I do want to ask you something before I go any further with that. You talked in your book, and I remember seeing this clip years ago, way before we ever met, that Mike Wallace clip. Was that James Eastland talking to Mike Wallace? Was that the same James Eastland or the son of James Eastland?
It was, let's see, I don't know if his name was James, but anyway, James Eastland's nephew
Okay.
became a senator.
That's the one that talked to Mike Wallace.
Yeah, James Eastland was obviously dead.
Right,
But, yeah, to his
Okay.
nephew. In fact, James Eastland's brother avenged, his death by doing what he did to the Holberts,
Right.
which obviously we're going to talk about in a second. And so basically that brother was a murderer.
Okay.
And that brother's son, who was
Became a
raised
senator.
on a plantation, became not just a senator, but he became head of the Judiciary Committee. And his nickname, they referred to the judiciary under him as the place where civil rights legislation went to die, because he was such an unreconstructed racist.
Okay. All right. And it's like I said, when I was doing the review, I remembered I've seen that clip before, because
I don't recall ever having seen that. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. Okay, so Luther was accused of killing a wealthy plantation owner. And you said, and certain dispute during a supposedly dispute, and certainly true of his wife, who was accused of nothing and was not named in news reports, you said in your book. So Luther Holbert and his wife, who were brutally murdered in Doddsville, Mississippi by white racists, disgusting, so brutally that they cut off their fingers and handed them out as souvenirs to this is directly from your book, to over 600 men, women, and children. Did you hear that, folks? And children. Then their ears were cut off and distributed. Mr. Holbert was so badly beaten, so severely, that one of his eyes popped out of its socket, hanging by a shred. Even that wasn't enough. Large corkscrews were produced and inserted into and pulled out from the Holbert's legs, torsos, and arms over and over again until there was no more sport in it. Only then the fire was set. They were still alive. Mr. and Mrs. Holbert were free Americans who were tortured in 1904, 4 decades after the Civil War ended. So a talking point, then the questions, Mary. I have always despised, and you might have talked about it in your book, and I've always told Deb this, I've always despised the pictures that you see of African Americans hanging and white racists hanging around there smiling with their kids like it's a picnic. I hate, it pushes me over the edge. And the children, which I feel is the true personification of evil. So the first question I want to ask you, you've talked about the N-word in your book, about was thrown around your house. You heard that growing up. We know about how your uncle was, and at least your grandfather with housing. We know that they were racist. That's on the record. So my question for you is, and reading about how you grew up, how did you as a person become so compassionate and such a strong advocate for Black people?
The most obvious reason is that I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, New York, not Jamaica Estates. Jamaica Estates, where my grandparents' house was and where my dad and aunts and uncles grew up, was 100% white, probably at the time 100% Christian and solidly upper middle class.
Okay.
Jamaica, which was a 5-minute bike ride away, was, when I was a kid, probably 70% Black, 30% white, lower middle class, working class, and kind of segregated along Hillside Avenue. So most of the Black families lived south of Hillside Avenue, and the white families lived north in the hill, over the hill. And so I was very cognizant of that fact. I was a white person living in a majority Black neighborhood, taking the subway to an almost entirely white school. And yet, I took the subway to school starting when I was really young, like 11 or something. And, I walked through my neighborhood to get to the subway, and I frequented the shops, and I, went to the Jamaica beef patty store on my way home. And I was very aware that there were like no Black people in my building, that my parents had no Black friends. And I was painfully aware of my grandparents' family's attitude towards Black people, but I never had a negative experience. I never understood the vitriol spouted by people who probably didn't know any Black people. So it was just this very strange discrepancy for me. And I just went by my lived experience, which is, what are they talking about? Where's this hatred coming from? I don't understand it.
Okay. Did you by chance hear from any of the Holberts' relatives that might have read the book or anything? No.
I don't know if I don't know if the line continued. I don't know if they had kids. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In your words, I know you said it on other shows, writing a chapter like Atrocities, it had to be probably one of the toughest things you've ever done.
It was very difficult. Writing the whole book was hard, but that was especially difficult because, I like to think that I'm fairly aware of the problems in this country with white supremacy, and that white privilege is one of the biggest problems we have. And because it's something that shouldn't exist, and two, it's something that's entirely unearned and arbitrary. But this reminded me just how easy it is for even the most attuned white person to ignore or forget our history and how it impacted people of color, especially Native Americans and Black Americans. That's hard. Like, when you want to be an ally and you realize that, because of my privilege and because I didn't have to live through this stuff, I don't have ancestors who lived through this stuff, that we just have the luxury of forgetting about it. And I think that in part is a terrible indictment of our system of education, because it's almost as if the message white kids get is that, oh, that's not your history, that's their history. So like this divide is there from the very beginning. And the other thing too, that not that it made it easier necessarily, but that it made it something I felt determined to do, was that, yeah, it was hard to write it. It was hard to realize that I'd forgotten it or never even knew some of it. Mm-hmm. But just imagine how hard it was to live it. Imagine how hard it is to have that be your legacy. So I have nothing to complain about.
Okay. I've said talking point. I've said many times over the last few years, I wish there was no such thing as Black Lives Matter, because that would mean that Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. That's the reality of it. Mm-hmm. But what pisses me off, and I've seen you talk about it before, is every time you put Black in front of something, but Black Lives Matter in particular, it's always this comparison of all lives matter.
Mhm.
all lives do matter, but all lives don't matter until Black lives matter. And they can't stand that simple reasoning of what I just said.
Mm.
And it's always with Black people, because when we say breast cancer, somebody doesn't say prostate cancer. There's no like, I won't say false equivalency, but there's not like minimizing. It drives me nuts. You see on Twitter, you see it happen. You see it in social media, you see it in talk shows, you see it, I don't watch Fox or any of these shows, but you still see the clips or pieces of it on Twitter. That's how I know what those idiots are saying over there. But does it drive you as nuts when you see Black Lives Matter being said that all lives matter? And it can never just be focused on Black Lives Matter and how do we make Black lives actually matter. So for the people that are so inside themselves, selfish, and a lot of them racist, and some of them are just inside themselves, and it's not my problem, it's their problem, which I hate too. Don't want to work to make Black Lives Matter. If you work with, find out about the organization, find out why black people in 2021, I gotta curse, I gotta say, I'm getting aggravated. Why in the fuck they have to still say Black Lives Matter? For all these years, Black lives should have mattered. So what is if you had to break it down, your thoughts, how do you, I know it drives you crazy, but what would you say to these people that have to say all lives matter?
I mean, I guess the only thing to say is thanks for the shortcut. I now know that you're a horrible racist.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And they hate that.
Well,
they hate that.
Yeah. Well, too bad, because honestly, and look, I know this isn't just first of all, I think there's a difference between being racist and being a racist. Like, I think all white people are racist because we were raised to be. It's not something we chose. It's something that we have to work really hard every day of our lives to overcome. And if you don't admit that, then you're never going to change. And I'm just talking, I'm not saying, and that's the difference. Like, being a racist is a choice. It's active. Being racist is sort of passive. It's sort of this knee-jerk thing. It's like, when you're a kid and you're driving along and suddenly you head into a Black neighborhood and very subtly your mom locks the car door. Like, you pick that stuff up. The way the media portrays crime as being an almost exclusively Black affair in this country.
Right.
That stuff sticks with you. And unless you're conscious of it, it's always going to be operative, right? But so there are even people who, definitely aren't out there being actively racists. But anybody who says I'm not racist, but hasn't done the work, yeah, sorry, you don't get to do that. But anybody who says all lives matter, they're making it very clear where their allegiance lies. They're making it very clear that they believe that they deserve their white privilege, and they're not going to do anything to undo the institutionalized racism that exists in this country. So I have no patience. And again, just, thanks for the tip. Now I know exactly who you are.
Okay. And the flip side of that, what aggravates me, and I call it out on Twitter all the time, is Black people that sell out their race. Candace Owens, Larry Elder, these type of creeps. I hate to even name them, but I have to. Diamond and polyester or whatever hell those jokes are.
I think it's cubic zirconia and
cubic zirconia. And my favorite one that's paid by your uncle is the guy who has, if you look him up, he's got a whole, I looked him up, the guy with the beard that holds up the blacks for Trump. He's got a whole history. He's a real piece of work. Okay. Chapter 2, impunity. I want to read a passage for the viewers because I learned so much about, I learned all this stuff in history class, and then I read your book and I'm like, how interesting is this that we were never taught this in school?
So weird.
So yeah, especially about the North, because the North gets so much credit. So much about the North not being such saints as people want to portray them. Well, the North was so perfect. So I want to read an excerpt from your book. In some ways, the North is just as responsible as the South for Lee's role in perpetuating the propaganda known as the lost cause. The myth that the South, and I always screw this word up, seceded, is that how you say it, seceded? Okay, seceded as a rebuke to an overreaching federal government and had nothing to do with slavery. Okay, yeah, sure. A great opportunity was missed when the Confederate battle flag, which stands for treason and human cruelty, did not come to be viewed with the same universal horror as the swastika in Germany, which is always the comparison that I make. Today, it is still profoundly flown as a symbol of what some call Southern pride, in quotes, even though it is still, this is directly from your book, as the Southern Baptist Convention in 2016 said, a symbol of hatred, bigotry, and racism. The Southern Baptist, now that sounds kind of, is that a religious organization?
I believe so.
Imagine that, a religious organization calling it what it is, because so many religious organizations fly the Confederate flag.
That's right.
Okay, so the question I have for you, you know Deb and I live in Northwest Indiana. I'm not proud of it. I'm only here because she got a job at BP. And the minute she retires, the pups and I are pulling up the U-Haul and getting the fuck out of here. Okay, so I see this piece of shit traitor flag flown here quite a bit. It's flown in the back of pickup trucks, and it's at protests all over the place. And you know, they even got your uncle on part of it. It's amazing to me. So I feel with your uncle, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel that before he became president, he wouldn't have known a flag, but a Confederate statue is something he fought for, the difference between Robert E. Lee and Bruce Lee, okay, as a statue, okay? I really don't believe it. So I'm curious,
You're right.
in your, say it again?
You're right.
Yeah, exactly. In your infinite wisdom, who do you think, because it wasn't him, who do you think gave him that particular red meat, the statues and the flag, to push it out and they love it?
You know, Donald is somebody who's always trying to push the envelope to get what he wants. And as soon as he realized that his racism and misogyny were playing well with the Republican Party, and that the Republican leadership was going to let him get away with it because he was starting to lead in the polls. And then obviously we know what happened after the November 2016 election. He was just going to keep doing it and keep trying to get away with it. And so it's not like he strategized. It's just like, oh, this is working and this is my base now and they love me. And that's the only important thing in the world. So if they're neo-Nazis and they like fascist, then I like neo-Nazis too. And I'm going to be a fascist. I mean, I think he's instinctively a fascist, but it suited him. Because, you know, nothing similar could have happened on the left, because it's not about being loved because he's good. It's about being loved because he's horrible.
Yeah.
And he loves the anger and he loves the divisiveness, and he's quite good at stoking both of those things. So it's terrible for the country, but it's been very good for him. And again, the Republican Party has decided that he's their best hope for clinging to power in the face of changing demographics that do not favor them.
Okay. All right. Talking point off of that in that same chapter, and something else I learned. Like I said, your book was a history lesson. I'd like to take it to the schools, but they would run me out of Northwest Indiana.
Oh yeah, it would be labeled critical race theory.
Oh, and I've got that.
Because they don't know what that is, but that's
right. And I got in my notes to talk about it. Okay, so I learned in your book that if you watch, before I says, if you watch my review, Mary calls out Democrats too. That's why I consider her a balanced person. You know, whether you always agree with people's beliefs, there's probably things that Mary and I disagree with, and that's fine. We're human. But you were fair. I felt that you were fair because you called out Democratic stuff too that is factual. And to me, facts are facts no matter what. You can always talk opinions, but when it's in the history books as factual, it's factual, whether Kellyanne Conway wants to talk about alternative facts or not. So I learned in your book that in 1975, after 110 years had washed away Robert E. Lee's sins and reinvented him, as you said, which is ridiculous, as some kind of hero, the U.S. House of Representatives voted 407 to 10. Now, before I read to restore Lee's full rights of citizenship. Now, I'm going to stop there before I read the rest of it. If they voted, correct me if I'm wrong, Mary, if they voted 407 to 10, there was Democrats in there that voted too, right?
Overwhelmingly.
Right.
A tiny percentage of Democrats that I'm assuming that 10 were
was
all
probably had to be
but
Democrats,
that
and
was
maybe
a
someone would have
tiny
cut.
percentage of all of the Democrats in Congress.
Right, right. So in 1975, which I was like, really, Robert E. Lee. So we're voting to give him back his citizenship, a traitor. Okay. You went on to say, I can only imagine how the descendants of the people he enslaved and of the Union soldiers who died because of him must have felt. Now, another fact that I learned in your book of somebody that I actually adore as an ex-president, but I wasn't happy about this. 3 years later, Jimmy Carter, as president, restored citizenship to the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. That's correct, right? I have that correct?
Mhm.
So doing so, he said, quote, it completes the long process of reconciliation that has reunited our people following the tragic conflict between states. Okay. The tragic conflict between the states. Jimmy, I don't know. I would be dishonest if I didn't say like I did that I do adore President Carter as a his post presidency, but WTF there. Let me add one other part that I'm gonna ask you a question. Right? You added, historian Francis McDonald wrote, the separate measures assured that the two deceased Confederates might legally hold office and serve jury duty. Did you hear what I'm saying, viewers? Legally hold office and serve jury duty. So what I want to ask you, Mary, is, like I said, I told the viewers that you did call Dems out in your book. And again, that's balanced to me. Did you know those particular facts before you did your research for your book? Or were you like me? Did you, well, of course I learned it through your book. When did you learn that?
I don't remember. I mean, a lot of this stuff was stuff that I had known, but again, totally forgot about because I had the luxury of forgetting about it. So pretty sure I definitely had known about Ford. Maybe I had known about Carter. And again, it's very important. Well, first of all, yes, their voting rights were restored and their ability to hold office was restored, but they were still dead. So luckily, we don't have to be faced with that. However, if they were alive, a lot of people would vote for them.
Mhm.
So I rarely think that what Democrats do is as egregious as what Republicans do, although it's very difficult to say what Ford did was worse than what Carter did. It's just all horrible. It's incredibly insensitive and ahistorical and cruel and all that other stuff. But I think the motives are different because with Carter, I think it points to a tendency among certain kinds of Democrats to cater to this mythical Republican whom they think they can bring over to their side, you know, and at the expense of their own base. Like, what Democrat cheered that on? And what Republican was going to say, oh, cool, now I'm going to vote for Carter? We still do this.
Right.
Right. So the bigger problem is that it set up a paradigm whereby if you can't hold Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis accountable, even posthumously, because they weren't held accountable. Well, I think Davis was in jail for 2 years, but nothing happened to Robert. He had a lovely life, you know, and has how many statues erected in his honor. If you can't hold the two biggest traitors to the to the United States accountable, even after they've been dead for over 100 years, why do we think it's going to be easy to hold the second biggest traitor to the United States, Donald John Trump, accountable? We may, with every passing generation of allowing powerful white men to do things, horrible, horrible things to this country and this country's citizens with impunity, we make it harder to hold our current criminals accountable. It's really disturbing.
Okay. Andrew Johnson, you talked in your book, this mama look here, was president, as you know already, after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865 and halted the momentum of Reconstruction, but also seemed determined to undermine the very purpose of which the Civil War had been fought. As you know, your uncle has been compared to Andrew Johnson many times. At least I've seen it him being compared. Who would you consider worse, Andrew Johnson or your uncle as president?
Well, it's too early to tell, because we don't yet know the long-term consequences of Donald's tragic 4 years in the White House. You know, we do know that the consequences of Johnson's actions led to the failure of Reconstruction, which had such enormous what's that word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word, but anyway, Reconstruction. Oh, promise.
Promise. I thought I was going to say it, but it was too easy. It's too easy. To say.
Right. Well, it's always the easy one. To
Right. Go ahead.
And the 100 years of Jim Crow that followed that failure. So, and while he was in office, he did everything in his power to undermine any progress for the freed Black Americans. So I don't know. We could, if we end up with Donald or somebody like him back in office in
2024.
losing all track of time.
Okay, 2024.
Thank you. 2024. Then America will become an autocracy, and it will slide into fascism. And I think the long-term effects of that will be, shocking to say, even worse. So unfortunately, we don't know the answer to that question yet, which is demoralizing and exhausting, and why I think it's really hard for a lot of us to hang in there, you know, because it's not over yet.
Right. And piggyback on what you just said, you said somebody equal. I'm a realist. And if we don't get our shit together in this country, because I did a show recently and I said my bad Brad's thoughts about MAGA with that whole BS. America was never great, and we're never going to be great. I tell people, stop with this. We have to, and you said this, we have the potential to be so much better, but we can never be great because you're not going to change a contingency of people that are not going to fucking change. They're not going to get vaccinated, which is ridiculous. They're not going to change their racist views. They're not going to do any of that. So I foresee if we don't get it together in this country, I actually think we're going to get somebody worse than Donald because of one major reason. We're going to get somebody that's worse than him because they're actually going to be smart and know how to really use the system and be able to stay focused even in their evil ways, where Donald could never stay on talking points and other things. It's like, for example, whatever he was the other day, he just blurted out about golden showers. I mean, they were like, where did that come from, Donald? No one asked you that question, but that's his mind, and you can't get them past the insanity. So I exactly agree with what you're saying, but I actually think we might get somebody worse than him.
I think it depends. Right now, the most important election we've ever faced in our lifetimes is 2022. If the Democrats lose the House or the Senate or both, it's over.
Yeah.
And 2024 won't matter. And I think the Republicans then will be able to rig the system even farther in their favor, which means that Democrats won't be able to win nationwide elections again, because this is what the Republicans are grappling with right now because of those demographic changes they're facing. If there were a level playing field and everybody who's allowed to vote could vote, Republicans would never win free and fair national elections again, ever. So they want to flip the switch, but they can only do that illegitimately by passing voter suppression laws and gerrymandering, et cetera. So if they don't take the House and Senate in 2022, they'll still have a couple of years to do that. But I think at that point, they'll still need Donald, because as shocking as this is to say, he's the only person at the top of that party, or the only person I can think of who would be running in 2024, who has the kind of charisma that connects with the base.
Yeah.
Nobody else has. Ted Cruz, Hawley, Cotton, my friggin' cousins. No. And I'm not saying like it's a kind of charisma that doesn't appeal to me or you or sane people, but he does, I hate to say it, have it. And if you met him, you would understand that. And then after 5 seconds, you would also realize he's a total idiot and a moron. And you don't understand why anybody else is finds him appealing, but here we are. Tens of millions of people do.
They sure do. Chapter 3, American Carnage. Bill Barr, here's a passage. Until he came into the picture, the DOJ Civil Rights Division took the lead on addressing affirmative action, segregation, predatory lending, and voting rights. Under his, which is Bill Barr, and Jeff Sessions, but people forget about that loser, leadership, the message being sent by the Trump administration was that, in the words of Vanita Gupta, President Biden's associate attorney general, quote, civil rights enforcement is superfluous and can be easily cut. Christian Clark, the new head of President Biden's Civil Rights Division, said no administration has done more to obstruct and defy the mission of the division in its 63-year existence. I want to say that again, 63-year existence. So a talking point and a question. When I read that, I saw your uncle, I went back and watched a clip in 15 when your uncle spoke to Don Lemon and he said, I'm the least racist person you've ever, and it's, oh my God. But I went back and doing the research for this show. I went back and watched that whole clip where he said, I get along with liberals and Democrats, and oh my, everything that flew out of his mouth was bullshit. So I want to ask you, people like Bill Barr and so many others should be brought to justice by the current, in my opinion, the current Attorney General Merrick Garland. I'm fed up with him. What are your thoughts?
I'm terrified. I mean, if January 6th isn't enough of a reason to want to investigate and bring indictments against people, then what hope do we have? I mean, we have 10 sitting senators, and I've lost count of how many people, Republicans in the House of Representatives, who are active seditionists. These are people who actively participated in, or at least encouraged, overthrowing their government, and they're still being allowed to continue to run our government. How is that a thing that's possible? So I think Merrick Garland lost my trust and confidence when he decided to continue having the DOJ represent Donald in the case with E. Jean Carroll, whom he allegedly, I'm not going to say allegedly, whom he raped 20 years ago and then defamed by saying that she was a liar and she wasn't attractive enough for him to rape. So she's suing him for defamation, and Merrick Garland decided that the DOJ should waste its time and resources defending him, as if it's okay, that the argument being that defaming American citizens was part of his job. It's mind-blowing, because I've spoken to enough people who know a lot more about this than I do to know that, yes, his argument is well-reasoned legally, but you could also make the opposite argument using legal reasoning and not end up looking like a scumbag. So I don't know I do think I know what it was about. I think Merrick Garland is an institutionalist, and he seems to think that institutions are more protecting his institution, which, by the way, I think he's doing a terrible job of, but protecting his institution is more important than protecting American democracy, because he doesn't understand that that's what's happening.
Okay, and let me clarification so my viewers, because I'm a little bit confused. Currently, Merrick Garland is still representing your uncle in the E. Jean Carroll case right now?
Yes.
I thought, for some reason, I thought I read a drop. Okay, so he's still representing. Terrible. Okay, not surprised. Chapter 7, The Precipice. You wrote that the real damage, however, was done by the Republican Party failure to hold, and we've been talking about this, Donald accountable after his first impeachment. I absolutely agree with you. Mitch McConnell, another great one, was a huge part of this, and another that I absolutely don't care for. That's just completely out there. The question I want to ask you is, do you think Donald's 4 years in the Q, as I call it, when he was in the QVC house because he was selling everything out of it, Mitch actually controlled Donald without Donald realizing it?
I wouldn't say controlled. Although, I mean, he's really easy to manipulate. Just ask Vladimir Putin. I think it's more that Mitch McConnell, who, as evil as he is, I refer to him as the second greatest traitor to this country, even though I think I said earlier it was Donald, but it actually is Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell, I mean, I think Donald's the worst person because he's actually killed more Americans than any other American. So Mitch McConnell has been taking us down from within. I mean, at least Robert E. Lee declared war against us. Mitch McConnell, as a United States Senator, has been using our institutions against us. And he's extraordinarily dangerous. But I don't think he felt the need to control Donald. I sort of feel like he realized at some point that he wasn't going to win the kind of fight Donald fights, because nobody can go as low as Donald can.
Right.
But he, as many other people who are more powerful and who are smarter than Donald often do, realized that Donald could be of use to him.
Right.
And
That's a
he
great
just,
point.
you know, because again, Donald doesn't understand how anything works. And as long as his ass was sufficiently kissed, or, you know, he was made to feel good about himself and made to feel whatever, he was going to sign off on anything the Republicans in Congress wanted, pretty much.
Okay. In the same chapter, you talk about the 2020 election. Instead of asking the standard question that many have, is Donald going to run? I want to give you a talking point and ask your opinion that one of my writers, political writers, Nikki Slusher for Ringside Report, brought up. She thinks that if Donald runs, that he's going to grift until about 2023, because now, in her words, he can play around with the money. But once he announces that he's going to run, there's stricter from what Nikki told me, and you would know better than me. Nikki said he'll grift till like the last minute because he can spend his money anywhere. But once he announces, if he does announce, then it's campaign. He can't do all the same things he's doing right now.
Right.
So
yeah, the campaign finance laws will kick in, and there will have to be accounting and all of that. And yes, as you said, there will be constraints upon how the money can be spent and how it can be raised. Yeah.
Okay. Do you see that as a particular scenario, since he's grifting the hell out of them on the Stop the Steal, that could be possible, that he'd wait to the end and then announce?
I think it depends on a couple of things. First of all, if you had asked me after the November election, November, December, do I think he would run again? My answer would have been no, because he suffered this humiliating loss. He'll never get over it. And like all one-term losers, he will slide into irrelevance. I didn't understand at the time, although I probably should have, but I'm a Democrat. So I guess I just, wasn't quite there yet. I didn't realize that the Republican Party in its entirety, well, almost in its entirety, was going to either support or stay quiet about his spreading the big lie. And I certainly didn't realize that they were going to be almost completely on his side when it came to the ways in which he's tried to create this revisionist history about the insurrection on January 6th. So he's been allowed to stay relevant. He is still the head of the party. There are no two ways about that. They still ask for his endorsements. They still kiss his ring. So he's probably now believes he didn't lose because he's been allowed to spread that lie so much. And because his claims of fraud have gone unchecked on the right, they have therefore made a very strong push at the state legislative level to introduce voter suppression bills in every state. So all they need to do is fix it so that Democrats can't win statewide elections in Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. And if they can do that in the next couple of years, and Donald knows that if he runs, he cannot lose because he's a wimp. If he thinks that it's a fair fight and he'll lose, he won't run.
Right.
But if he knows he can, he's in so much legal trouble. He's in so much financial trouble. He would be dying to get back into the Oval Office because, you know, he needs the powers and protections it affords. But it depends on what happens in 2022. Like, so much depends upon 2022. It's quite scary, honestly. But he will grift as long as he can,
Right.
for sure. And he will, if he does decide that, hey, if he's a Republican nominee, he's going to win the whole thing, he will wait until the last possible second to declare. And that will
There's some in
probably
there-
happen.
Then there's some of her theory you kind of agree with. It's possible that he could do that because he could spend that money in type of way. Okay.
But again, that will only happen if he believes that the system is so rigged in his favor that it's a foregone conclusion that he'll quote unquote win.
Okay. Just to totally popped in my head, it's like 180 of what we're talking about. I got to ask you, does he go anywhere besides from Mar-a-Lago? And is it Bedminster? No, I'm being, I swear to God, I'm being serious. Mar-a-Lago and Bedminster, is that what it's called? Bedminster? Bedminster. Does he go anywhere? Because I mean, I've never seen anybody doesn't go on a vacation anywhere. I mean, the paparazzi, he's like nowhere.
Well, what do you make of somebody who goes on vacation, but goes to stay for 3 weeks at a golf club? Oh my
Right.
God.
That he owns, right? I mean, that he owns.
But it doesn't matter because no matter where he goes, he stays in a hotel and he plays golf. So he may as well just be in Florida or New Jersey.
Right. Okay.
You know, it's not like he's going to museums and the beach or
Museum. He wouldn't know a
Whatever.
Confederate museum from the Museum of Natural Art. Okay. You talked about in your book, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, two other that I despise, that they were free to be as horrible publicly as they were both privately. No filter, no need to pretend, no anymore they cared about democracy. They could engage in gerrymandering and voter suppression, that black and brown people don't have any rights, or that through regressive legislation and stacked judiciary, LGBTQ people and women didn't have any rights. So the question I want to ask you off of this, and we might have talked about this before, and maybe we haven't. People of color, LGBTQ community, and women, but more so LGBTQ community and people of color. It drives me nuts that anybody of either group could, I don't care if they're Republicans, that doesn't bother me. But I always tell people, I don't care, you could hate Reagan, you could all say, but I could live with you, we could disagree on policies unless they're evil. I could debate you on policies, but there's no debating. It's evil versus good when it comes to Donald John Trump. What do you think it is that anybody from the African-American community or the LGBTQ community could still, even if it's small numbers, but there are some, it's factual, could support him? It's mind-blowing to me.
Well, I think, I'm certainly not going to speak for a person of color, but in terms of LGBTQ people, what I've heard the argument be is that, there are things more important to me than my sexual orientation. Okay. But, part of it too is that, a large segment of the American population has been trained by the right to vote against its self-interest over the course of several decades, So that's working class people. Like, I don't understand how a working class person could vote for a Republican. And at this point, I don't understand, well, because we're talking about white working class people. And, as happened during the time that Black people were being enslaved in this country, white laborers were convinced to believe that their whiteness was more valuable than having economic solidarity with Black workers, which would have over time given them much more leverage. So, it's nothing new, but it is still pretty astonishing. And at this point, I feel the same way about people in the military. How you could vote for anybody, especially somebody like Donald, is mind-blowing, because it's not just, I mean, I'm fairly certain no other elected Republicans was agreeing with his statements that the military, people in the military are all suckers and losers, but they didn't push back on it at all. And they support him 100%. So like what person who's, actively serving or veteran could vote? I don't understand that either.
Or you're gonna make me go there. It's not popular, but you see my shadow box behind me I'm pointing to.
Hmm.
I've said this and it's not popular and I'm gonna be very blunt. I don't give a fuck because it's the truth. I did 20 years and 28 days during the Gulf War and the Iraq War. Gulf War, I was in country. The Iraq War, I was in the Pentagon. That's where I retired from. Any veteran that still supports your uncle after January 6th insurrection by domestic terrorists that were predominantly white, that if they would have been people of color, they would have been murdered on the steps, there would have been blood everywhere, and Donald Sye would have been perfectly fine with it. And it would have been, it would have been wonderful. That supports him right now is a traitor to this country. I don't care. I don't want to hear about thank you for your service and all that. You don't care about this country. The only point that I'll make about active duty, I agree with you. When you go into a voting booth, it's private. As an active duty member, when I was, you're not allowed to speak out against the commander in chief. I want to be fair to active duty troops.
Oh, I understand that, but
Oh,
he's not
right.
he's not that anymore.
No, he's not that anymore. But I'm saying I don't even understand how active duty people after January 6th could vote for him if he ran again in 2024.
And a lot of them will.
Exactly. It's just like, so as far as the veteran side of me, where you're talking about the LGBTQ community, where you talked about the military, you are a traitor. I don't care who you are, if it's your mother, your father, your son, your daughter, your wife. If you're okay after January 6th, you are an effing traitor to this country. End of story. You might not have marched in the Capitol that day, but you support it. And that's too far for me.
Yeah. But even before then, I mean, it's a slightly different issue, but it's always been the Republicans with the Party of National Security. I'm sorry, Donald, so many of those policies that occurred during his administration made our military more vulnerable. The whole Russian bounty thing, the way the withdrawal from Syria and the ways in which we put the Kurds at risk. I mean, what he did in Afghanistan inviting the Taliban to Camp David on September 11th and then, negotiating to have the second in command of the Taliban released from prison. And I mean, come on, man.
Right.
Like, why is that okay? I don't get it. Like, what's the trade-off? Like, what is he doing that makes it? I guess he just hates the right people or something. I don't know.
Right. Well, I'll piggyback off what you just said again. Go back, folks. Research is not me talking off the top of my head because I have very strong talking points. And like Mary did research for a book, I triple and double check because I stand on what I believe, and especially when it's factual. Graham was on, I believe, CNN and said he's a xenophobe, a homophobe, and a racist, and he'll get our troops in trouble. But now he's so far up Donald's ass, he could tell you what he had for lunch. It's the same thing, it doesn't stop.
And meanwhile, you have active duty officers or active duty military complaining about having to get a COVID shot,
right?
And defying their current commander. What universe are we living in? It's very confusing.
Yeah, right. I had to get those shots. I didn't like them. I had no choice. I had to get them. I went overseas to Cuba. I mean, Italy, I had to get the shots.
I'm guessing that people in the military on a daily basis have to do a lot of shit they don't want to do. I'm guessing you probably were comparatively fine getting a friggin' shot than you were having to go in country. I mean, come on.
Thank you. Look, when I came in, you had to go clean the shitters. There wasn't a debate. Well, I don't want to clean the shitters. I didn't mess them up. I had to go clean them. That's just the way it is. That's the way it is. Then when I moved up in rank, I told my troops, now you got to go clean the shitter because I did my time. Okay. Chapter 8, The Long Shadow. You wrote, by the time I was a sophomore in college, I knew more about the Holocaust than I did about the genocide of Native Americans and the complete oppression of enslaved Africans from subsequent generations in my own country. The message I received through most of my years at school and my life in general, you actually talked about this earlier in the show, was that Black American history was not my history. and what not was not our history, but something separate, other. That part of your book is why I put in my review that I think that it should be, amongst many other things, part of critical race theory. Now, you're way more well-versed than I am on critical race theory. I know what it's about, but I'm not an expert to speak on it without making some mistakes. So I want to refer to you. A lot of stuff that you taught in your book, is that what they want to have in critical race theory in schools that they're fighting back? No?
First of all, critical race theory is a legal theory
Okay.
that has to do with racial justice issues and how they've been handled.
Okay.
And it's taught in grad school. So there's no critical race theory in
Okay.
K through 12 education.
It's a
What the
misnomer that they put out. Okay.
what the Republicans are, they're just using it as a scare phrase, even though probably not one of them could define what it means. Because what they really mean is they don't want schools, K through 12 schools, to be teaching American history accurately. They're taking out any discussion of Frederick Douglass or white supremacy or the KKK. Not allowed to teach those things anymore because their argument is that it hurts white children for them to be led to believe by educating them that racism happened in America. It's so cynical and it's so dangerous that, we end up to this point where in Texas now, they're basically saying, well, if you have a book about the Holocaust, you also need to have a book making the opposite argument. I'm like, what exactly is the opposite argument?
That they deserved it, right? That they deserved
Or that it didn't happen.
Right.
We know Holocaust denial is alive and well, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And that too is very dangerous. So, you can't talk about slavery. You can't. So basically what the Republicans want to do is make sure that white supremacy becomes even more entrenched in this country. And I'm arguing that unless we face the fact that this is a racist country, it is built on white supremacy. And one of our two major political parties has as one of its main platforms, white supremacy. We are never going to be better, ever. And they want to entrench that. They want to codify this in our education so that white children don't have to have their feelings hurt. And that just shows you the failure of imagination. Because it's sort of suggesting that by teaching our history accurately, we would somehow be blaming our kids for it. It's absurd.
Yeah.
But you know what? If we allow our children to grow up, white children to grow up in ignorance of the truth, then they will never challenge their white privilege. And then you know what? They will be responsible.
Okay. So talking about white privilege, are you ashamed to have white privilege?
No, I'm not ashamed of it because again, it's not my fault that I have it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody I know was responsible for the fact that there was slavery in this country.
Right.
It's not my responsibility. However, I benefited from the same system that allowed slavery to happen because one of the rationales one of the excuses made that it was okay is because white people are superior and Black people aren't human. And, that basically perpetuated the idea of race and white supremacy, and from which came white privilege. So if I just, if I deny that, right? If I choose to remain ignorant of my white privilege, even as I benefit from it, then you know what? I am responsible for perpetuating that system because the same system is still operative. Let's not kid ourselves here. So what I will say is that I can't get rid of it. I wish I could get rid of it, but I can't because I'm white. And no matter where I go, like I unless something really weird happened, I can't think of a situation that I would reasonably be in which my life would be in danger from cops. I can't imagine a situation in which a cab driver isn't going to stop for me late at night.
Mhm.
I mean, come on. So I can't give it away. It's inherent in our society, but I can be very mindful of it, and I can make sure that other people are mindful of it, and I can reject it when possible, you know. But it's only something to be ashamed of if you choose to benefit from it and, you know, fuck everybody else.
And you're preaching to the choir, because I feel the same way. I'm not ashamed of my white privilege, but I use it to help people of color at every turn that I can. What I'm ashamed of is what you just said, basically the same thing. I'm ashamed of white people that don't think that they have it, that get sarcastic and make comments about, well, I wish I had some of that white privilege. You were born with it. When you came out the womb, you were born with it, like you said. But I will say that I have a talking point where I say poor white people and poor Black people, I really wish in this country they would get together. But unfortunately, this is the way I feel. This is my opinion, that poor white people who support Donald look down on Black people, and instead of coming together as one and speaking out and speaking up and making change in this country, because you're facing the same things in this country. If you're in abject poverty, you're facing it. But for some reason, they hooked up their caboose to Donald. But I actually think that you don't see, but when you talk about the police, that there are some poor white people that are getting the shit kicked out of them, and probably shit counties in the South and places where, you know, they might be a town drunk, or they might whatever be, and they're getting violated. But they rather get beat up than get with Black people that are suffering a lot of the same things, and work together to get this out there and get it changed. Because white people, and I'm saying it as a Caucasian man, because there's no box to check for Italian and Russian. If there was, I'd check it. Refused to get together in most cases, not all, I want to be fair, to get with poor, impoverished Black people to make these changes, to do things, to make systemic changes in our system. And I think that's where Donald got them to vote for him. Where I hear you. How he could never, and you know this, Mary, better than I, he could never fucking relate to these people. If half of the people that he tells this to would show up in Mar-a-Lago, he'd tell them the delivery's around the back if he answered the door. I mean, how they in their mind have set themselves to do it. But that was piggybacking off of your thing about what you said. Okay, chapter 9 is facing the truth. Another excerpt, the mantra of one of my favorites, sarcastic here, fuck your feelings, okay? Quote, at Donald's rallies reverberated and reminded us that even though it goes underground from time to time, the impulse toward cruelty never completely goes away, okay? I've said that. I said that people who say he started racism, that's not balanced. No, he didn't. He inflamed it. He threw gasoline on it. He worked it to his advantage. But this fuck your feelings, I want to talk about that. So out here, you see these, I'm gonna go there, 2 teeth inbred hicks with the Confederate flags that have in their yard, fuck Biden. Literally says fuck Biden. So then little Johnny or little Lisa go to school because they read that and like, mommy, what does that say? It says fuck Biden. Then they go to school and they call little Tony and little Rosie, fuck you. And the teacher's like, where did you get that from? From my fucking parents at home that got a sign in their yard, which is unbalanced. That's look, I've said this before. If President Biden lost election fair and square, I'd fight your uncle every fucking day he was in office. But I would not be cool with people walking around saying, stop the steal, it was stolen, if he won fair and square. Having signs out a year after the election is over, you know, I wouldn't go for that either. That's unbalanced. Mm-hmm. But what I want to ask you is, would you agree that even if Donald were to croak tomorrow, that it's already out, the genie is already out the bottle. So even if they lose him, they're not going back. This whole thing about, oh, if Donald were to pass on, the ideology is there and it's going to remain there for a certain percentage of America. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's just another classic example of the Republican leadership thinking that they can tame the monster to do its bidding when the monster always ends up taking over the Republican Party. It happened with the Tea Party, which, gave us increasingly extreme people in Congress and increasingly extreme people primarying Republicans who were considered rhinos. The same thing is, it's like, okay, we'll just hang on to the monster that is Donald and all of the racism and homophobia and misogyny and anti-immigrant hatred that he inspires, and we'll use it to our advantage, but then, we'll be in control of it. No. I mean, again, how many active seditionists do we currently have in Congress who were totally supportive of Donald and his big lie about the election and his big lie about the insurrection? 74 million people voted for him the second time around. That's 12 million more with all of that information. Like, the only reason I was willing to give the 62 million in 2016 a little bit of the benefit of the doubt is because for a lot of people, they didn't know enough. How do you excuse that? I mean, it's like 12 million more people were like, oh, wow, cool. We like that. We love mass murder. We love torturing and kidnapping children. We love anybody who hates Muslims. I mean, or trans people or whatever. That's what we're dealing with. And again, I've said this many times. He didn't take over the Republican Party. He revealed the Republican Party. This is the Republican Party. It has been the Republican Party for a very, very, very long time now.
Okay. As I said before, you were fair. You called out where you saw Democratic stuff. I want to go current day with President Biden and Vice President Harris. You talked about them in the book. You called out both President Biden and Vice President Harris in this chapter after Republican Senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott, the only Black Republican today, who, I'll be honest with you, I don't care for him either, said in his rebuttal to President Biden's first address to Congress that America is not a racist country. Triple forget about in that statement. Vice President Harris also said America is not a racist country, adding, we must speak truth about its history with racism. President Biden made the same point. Now, I totally disagree with both of them. 100%. It is racist. Elements of it. It's always going to be racist. You're not going to change them. So that passage, which is vital that we address, you also said in this passage that it's vital that we address the past, but language matters. And saying we're not racist sends the wrong message. I couldn't agree with you more. It is the political equivalent of blaming police violence on a few bad apples. If we're told that we need to speak truth only about the past, it implies we can be complacent about the present. Mary, you were so spot on, it wasn't even funny. So the first, like I said, first I agree with you. When President Biden and Harris did that, do you think they were playing political games, or what were they doing by saying that?
Well, it's unbelievably, it's an incendiary thing to say. It would open them up to lots of criticism from all sides, I'm guessing, because listen, there are a lot of people on the left too who don't want to deal with it, who feel personally attacked if you say that. I mean, maybe they believe it, although what is America? Like, is America whoever, the party, is it the government? So then if that's the case, then in what universe can we say that America wasn't a racist country under Donald? Are they saying that it's not one now because Democrats are in charge? I'm not really sure. But what I would say to them is, okay, when did it stop becoming one? And there's no way to answer that question.
Because it hasn't, and it never will. It never
Yeah,
will.
it's sort of like, when was it great?
Mhm.
It never was. So,
Right.
I think it was, I don't think it was cynical, but I do think it was political.
Okay. Do you feel, I think you might have talked about on some other shows, do you feel another insurrection or some type of civil, because the world is cranked up to 10. I mean, not the world, I want to talk about America. America to me is dialed up to 10 right now. And when you live in New York, I live in Northwest Indiana, I see it out here, it's insanity. From the anti-vaxxers, and not the crazy left and the right, the fringes, because we got them on both sides, that you're going to get microchipped or grow a third nipple, that bullshit. You got people more in the mainstream than ever before that won't get vaccinated. Do you think another insurrection or something in this country, like you said, we got to have a reckoning, I absolutely agree. But do you think something crazy, because we are, in my opinion, dialed up to 10, is going to happen, and probably sooner than later?
They're laying the groundwork for that, because what they're doing is they're making it very clear that any election a Democrat wins was stolen.
Mm-hmm.
So, what happens in 2022, say, if some of the crucial Senate races are close in swing states? What happens in 2024 if the results are delayed? And basically it would be exactly the same thing as 2020. Whoever the Republican is will do what Donald did. He'll go out and claim victory before the results have been tabulated. And then if the Republican loses, we now know that there will be no delay. There was a delay in 2020. There won't be in 2024. 100% of Republicans, except Liz Cheney, if she's still in Congress, and Adam Kinzinger, if he's still in Congress, will immediately get on the Democrats won because they committed fraud and they stole it from us. Who knows what happens at that point? So that's why I'm disturbed, shall we say, that Democrats don't seem to be taking this as seriously as they should, because it's not just about losing an election, it's about losing American democracy.
Yes.
In which case you pull out all of the stops. You don't put together a fucking commission to decide if expanding the court is the right thing to do or not. You expand the court.
Mm-hmm.
It was politicized by Mitch McConnell.
Mm-hmm.
Expanding it just means righting that wrong, and we'll deal with the rest later. Same thing with the filibuster. Get rid of the fucking filibuster. If you have to bribe Sinema and Manchin, do it. They're already being bribed.
Mm-hmm.
Let's bribe them to do something good instead of, to protect pharmaceutical companies and coal companies and big oil. Let's do that, shall we? Just tell them to name their price. I'm so sick of this. And because it gives the opening for media to claim that, the Dems are weak, but what are they supposed to do? Because as we're learning, we don't have a democracy. If 96% of the party in power is ready to move forward with legislation, and 4% of the party in power doesn't want to, so they can't, how is that a democracy? Why isn't it majority rules? Seriously, if 49 Democrats wanted something and one didn't in this Senate, the 49 get nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And what's even worse is that Joe Manchin is one of two senators in one of the least populated states.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and by the way, one of the poorest. His state
Mm-hmm.
would probably benefit disproportionately from this legislation. So I don't know, I feel like I'm rambling, but
No, you're absolutely right.
Infuriating.
No, you're right. And that's why I put out a thing the other day. I did a show on Kinzinger and Cheney. I said, stop. By doing the right thing doesn't negate all the fucking horrible things they've done. When I found out, and I found it out in a tweet that you retweeted, I knew about Kinzinger because I saw on Bill Maher that he voted for Trump and your uncle in 20. But I didn't know Liz Cheney did too.
Actually, the reason I didn't retweet you is because that isn't what I tweeted. I just wanted to be clear. Although it's true.
Okay.
I was basically, what did I say? They voted against raising the debt ceiling.
Oh, she didn't vote for Donald?
No, I'm sure she did. What
Okay.
I'm saying is what I tweeted about
Oh, okay.
was that they didn't vote to raise the debt ceiling, which last I checked, they did every single time it needed to be when
Okay.
Donald was there,
Okay.
and they're just using it as a political weapon. And it shouldn't, how should it be political that we want to pay the debts that the Republicans racked up? I mean, if anything, Democrats shouldn't want to be. But the point is, you're right. They are, I think Liz Cheney voted with Donald like 96% of the time.
I think it was 93, 90, it might be 96. It doesn't matter. So I think she voted with him more than Jim Jordan did.
So, so great. She did the right thing once.
Right.
And that's not, and like, why does that take courage? You did you did your job, basically.
Exactly.
It's the rest of them who aren't doing their job. So.
Exactly.
The
So-
bar is so low. We
It's-
expect
yeah.
so little from these people.
Exactly. And I'm piggyback on what you said. If the Democrats don't start showing some balls and start doing things that I think they're able to do. And I understand President Biden I think he honestly wanted to try to work across the aisle. It's always better if you can. You can't. He can't. Fuck them. Do what you got to do, especially while you're in power. Because, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think if they win in 2022, the House and the Senate, I think they're going to impeach Biden and get him out.
They're going to impeach him, and they're going to get rid of the filibuster
Right.
immediately.
Right.
And, well, I don't think they would be able to convict him unless something really weird happened, because I don't think that many Democratic seats are up, are vulnerable. But they'll just hamstring him.
Yeah. Okay. Before I give you my closing thoughts, I want to turn the mic over to you again. Anything that you want to talk about outside of the book, or anything you want to put out, or whatever?
I just, want to acknowledge that I know that this is really tough stuff to talk about, because, the past isn't the past. We're still dealing with the fallout of our horrible history, because again, so much of it's gone unacknowledged and certainly unatoned for. And these are very fraught times. It's not just politically. It's not simply that, we're facing, certainly for the first time in my lifetime, facing the potential end of democracy, such as it is in America. Or I guess what's more accurate to say, we're actually facing the possibility that America will become an autocracy, which will endanger the entire world. We're dealing with catastrophic climate change. We're dealing with an ongoing pandemic that continues to kill hundreds, if not sometimes thousands of people every day, unnecessarily. We're continuing to live in a country that seems to be incapable of holding powerful white men accountable, no matter how egregious their crimes. I know it's exhausting and it is demoralizing. But what we need to remember, even though it's hard, is there are so many more of us than there are of them. There really, really are. And even though I usually am quite terrible about taking my own advice, we need to stay connected to each other. We need to be in a community, because even though certainly here, like COVID's definitely better, but it's still pretty isolating. You go out, everybody's still wearing masks, and because thankfully I live in New York, everybody's wearing masks, nobody's flying Confederate flags. But it's still pretty isolating. It's been a very rough, I said for a lot of us, it's been a rough 5 years, but it's certainly the last year and a half have been off the charts. So we're facing all sorts of things. And, those of us who have kids, or those of us who just love children, are worried about the next generations. But stay focused on what matters. And, if you need to tap out. Very early on in this particular journey, I was asked by Greenpeace if I wanted to be interviewed by Jane Fonda. It's like, yes.
I remember that.
Like, why do I have to think about that? Of course I do. And she was extraordinary. And at the very end, I think I said something like, we need to, because things were horrible then, they're horrible now, so I was basically like, we have to pace ourselves, and, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And she said something that was just absolutely perfect for the times we're living in. She said, isn't it more like a relay race? And it is more of a relay race. So if you need to pass the baton off to somebody for a little while
Mhm.
and tap out and regroup and do whatever it is that energizes you, then know that the rest of us are going to keep trying to get that baton across the finish line, and then join back in when you can, because it is, it's quite something what we're all living through, isn't it?
It is. It is. Okay. Well, I adore you. I'm always going to protect you. I don't just say it's not words. And again, you got me when I was reading the book. I said, "Oh shit, there's my name." That was really sweet of you. I was very touched. I know in the past I made you blush a little bit. I got to admit, I had to go. I had to run out the desk. Look at you, put my name in the book. It was cool. I appreciate that.
Well, look, I've appreciated your support and your friendship, and as I've said to you before, it's like one of the coolest things about this extraordinarily difficult year has been getting to meet people like you, which I don't know ever would have happened
Right.
in other circumstances. So anyway, I'm grateful to you as well.
Okay. All right. On that note, folks, that was, as I said before, her 4th appearance. I greatly appreciate it. I was waiting for Sebastian, but you said you had put him up. Oh,
Yeah.
How's Nemo? I saw a picture of Nemo.
Nemo's
looks
doing
pretty good.
great. Yep. I actually started a worm farm for her. So I grow beetles.
Okay.
So she has, who then, have worm. It's a complicated and kind of disgusting, but I feed them cornmeal and oatmeal and apples and potatoes. So they're very healthy worms. So Nemo's doing really well.
Okay. Hey, you enjoyed was today Sunday? I'm losing track of days. Yeah, today is Sunday.
Who knows? I've no
Yeah,
idea.
really. Enjoy the rest of your day. That the view you put up of Lyndon in the bed there, I was like, that's the view I want. So
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Well, you guys have to get back to, well, I'm sorry. I was going to say something rude about where you are, but I
no,
don't.
please do.
No,
Please
no, it's not fair. But I do think though that politically you should be somewhere else.
Well, I am. My mind is somewhere else, as they say. All right, Mary, you take care.
You too. This was awesome. Thank you for having me back. Bye.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye. Hey, folks, there you have it. Another conversation with someone that I adore. Brilliant woman who put it on the line in this book, The Reckoning. As I said to her, and I said to you in my review a couple weeks ago on my show, her legacy. Her legacy. I know what it took her to write this because I know what it took me to read this. Again, let me hold up the book over here. I'm looking off camera. The Reckoning. Pick it up and do reviews of it. Do reviews of it. Don't be scared to use your platform to review her book, because people like us are going to be all for it. The racists, not so much. They're going to be like, forget about it. That's okay. I don't care about them. Use your platforms. People need to read this book because I learned a lot of stuff in this book from Mary. Okay? Pick up this book. And it's going to be hard to read. And you're going to learn a lot of things. And you're going to be better for it. Because when you learn more, you know more, obviously, and you can do more. All right? Those are the type of guests that I'm going to bring on my show who move humanity forward. Mary L. Trump does it each and every time. I will always, always protect her. And those aren't just words, folks. All right. That's another show in the can. Forget about it. Remember to follow me on Twitter at BadBradRSR. Again, at BadBradRSR. Subscribe, leave your comments below the video. I greatly appreciate each and every one of my viewers and subscribers. And tell your friends. All right, folks. Remember, every act of kindness is a little love we leave behind. Bad Brad. Hey, folks, it's the man with the pinky ring and the New York thing. Forget about it, Bad Brad Berkwitt. And I want to talk to you about advertising on the Bad Brad Berkwitt show. If you would like to advertise, contact me at ringsidereport2014@gmail.com. Again, that's ringsidereport2014@gmail.com. Or call the Ringside Report office at 703-517-2155. And remember, folks, every act of kindness is a little love we leave behind. Bad Brad. Hey, folks, the man with the pinky ring and the New York thing. Forget about it. Bad Brad Berkwitt. I want to talk to you about my book, Boxing Interviews of a Lifetime by me. Forget about it. There it is. If you would like to pick up a copy of it, go to authorhouse.com. Again, that's authorhouse.com. If you would like to get it personally autographed with the message that you want in it, or you want me to put something in it, I can take care of that too. You just got to pay postage and handling to Indiana, and we can talk about that in the future. All right, again, Boxing Interviews of a Lifetime is the book. Pick it up. Bad Brad.